Welcome to Pairing Pages. Thank you for joining. My name is Aleesha Hansel and I am a wine writer. Today I will be speaking to the co-authors of We're Not Like Them, Christine Pride and Joe Piazza, and we'll be discussing the book in detail, picking up on a few themes in the book, as well as pairing two of those themes to today's wines by South African wine producer Journey's End. So we've got the Sir Lowry Cab Sauv 2019 and the Winemakers Reserve Chardonnay 2020. So before we start, let's just have a quick little recap of the book. So the book is about two lifelong friends, Jen, who is white, and Riley, who is black. Jen's husband is a Philadelphia police officer who kills an unarmed black teenage boy. Riley is the local TV news reporter who is covering the story. So this book explores the fallout of this situation, how they approach for the first time in their relationship, the glaring issues of racism, also touches on privilege, interracial relationships, cultural and societal pressures, class, and quite frankly, more than we can squeeze in to this episode. So I'd like to welcome the two co-authors, as I said, Christine Pride and Joe Piazza.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, guys.
Nice to be here.
How are you guys? Good? Well?
We're good, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for this. Very excited to get straight into it. So I kind of just want to mention, clearly we can see, Joe, you're white, Christine, you're black, and you use your kind of lived experiences and your understanding to come together and write alternating chapters from both viewpoints of Riley and Jen, and, discussing the whole book, which is, very deeply concerned in racism. So before we kind of delve more into that, tell us a little bit about yourselves and your friendship.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's funny that because this is a visual medium, right? But we do a lot of podcasts, and so then Christine and I actually actively have to say, "Hi, I'm Joe. I'm a white lady." Christine's like, "Hey, Christine, I'm black." Which
can be a little awkward.
First couple of times we said it, we're super awkward. Now we're so used to it that it seems commonplace. So I'm Joe Piazza. Hi, white lady here. Christine, I met Christine about, oh my gosh, like almost 4 years ago. She was my editor at Simon & Schuster for my last novel, Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win. And we just got on really well. I've liked all of my editors. They're all lovely, lovely women. But Christine and I kind of had that spark where we're like, oh my gosh, I think we're kind of friends, which is rare to happen in adulthood, to find a new female friend. And Christine even came with me on my book tour. We did a road trip through the American South, and we also worked on another quickie project together for the TV show Younger. We wrote a book called Marriage Vacation, which was based off the show, and we did that together in 4 weeks, which was insane.
Wow.
And so after that, we're like, how can we keep working together, but really working together, not just editor writer relationship. And Christine had this spark of an idea for a while, so I'll let her take that from here.
Yeah, this idea was born of a lot of terrible headlines that were happening over here in America, but also in a lot of ways globally this is an issue, but it was about, the germ of the idea was a friendship between a black woman and a white woman that is upended by a police shooting, right? So then everything else, we kind of filled in the blanks there, but it was really, the issue is really important to us itself, but also in terms of our collaboration, we saw it as a unique opportunity to do something a little bit different storytelling wise and to bring our different perspectives and experiences to the table. It would obviously have been a very different book if I wrote it alone or Joe wrote it alone. And so we wanted it to be, a better book, a richer book, a more dynamic book by virtue of our collaboration, so that our collaboration was purposeful and intentional, not just, hey, let's come together and write a book. We were really, mission oriented about what we were trying to do.
And how does the logistical process of writing a book together work?
It's not easy, especially
Not easy.
Joe and I have never lived in the same place at the same time either, not once. You know, when we started writing this book, it was actually January 2018. And so Joe was living in San Francisco at the time, and I've always been in New York. And then she moved to Philadelphia. But through this all, we just really had to figure out a way that we were going to, collaborate long distance and on different time zones, and, with different work styles and different time demands. I was still working full time at Simon & Schuster, and Joe always has a million projects going on, and she has 2 little kids. And, it was a lot to figure out how we were going to make the mechanics of this collaboration work, as you can imagine. There was lots of wine involved.
There was.
Theme for the night.
Gosh, that sounds stressful enough, just that, let alone kind of what the book was dealing with. And I know in the back of the book you mentioned that you want this to be a starting piece for a conversation, but like, how did you approach your conversations together? Were you worried of what one might say to the other with regard, because this is sensitive topics we're talking about here.
It is. We did, over here in the States, we were chosen as the Good Morning America book club pick. And we were interviewed by the incredible journalist, Deborah Roberts, who, she came right out and she's Black female journalist here in the States. And she came right out in the opening of the interview and said, you guys dealt with what is the third rail topic. Like, no one wants to touch this. People are so uncomfortable talking about race, and people are uncomfortable talking about race for different reasons. Particularly, I'm just gonna throw it out there, white people are super uncomfortable talking about race. Black people have been talking about race your entire lives, right? But white people, for the most part, have been given the privilege of not talking about it. And so we did very early on, because we were new friends too, remember, and professional friends. So it's not like we were having these deep philosophical conversations about race over wine. When we got together, because we were in different cities, we mostly talked about relationships and reality TV and the stuff that's what you talk about.
My terrible love life,
Yeah. Exactly. So, it's not like we were like, let's talk about race in America every time we got together. So all of a sudden we had to get into it, and we had to get into it really fast and in a really serious way. And I had to get very uncomfortable with just talking a little bit about my background and where I came from. My world has been incredibly white and privileged. I grew up in a working class suburb outside Philadelphia that was very, very white. My high school was very white. My friend group in college. And then I worked in media in New York City, which again, terribly, terribly white. So I had to recognize that and check myself. And Christine, asked me, she's like, why do you think you don't have more Black friends in the beginning of this? And I got very defensive at first, which was possibly the worst reaction I could have, that just shuts down the conversation immediately. And we didn't talk for a little bit. We had some uncomfortable texts, which you see so many uncomfortable texts in the book, because that mirrored real life. And we hear from so many readers that has mirrored their real life experiences too. But then we came back together and really hashed it out and started talking about it. And I had to say, look, give me grace. My defensiveness comes because I'm scared. I'm scared to say the wrong thing. I don't want to say something that's either insulting or stupid, or all of the things that we're afraid of. And so we both had these different anxieties. Christine didn't want me to be defensive, didn't want to get gaslit, all of the things white people often say when it comes to race. I didn't want to insult my new friend or feel stupid. So we both came to the table with these, but we didn't talk about those in the beginning. We just came with these anxieties. And I think we don't often put those out on the table in the beginning of a conversation, but it helped once we knew where the other person was coming from, and we were willing to listen to where the other person was coming from and what they knew and how their past experiences had shaped them.
I know in the back of the book you mentioned that there were points where you didn't think your friendship would recover, really. So I'm glad to see it has.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. We're all right. We're okay. We're still here. Although we keep saying as a joke, and it'd be funny if we did it during a wine tasting, we're like, what if we have a friend breakup during a live event and just freak everyone out? We're like, actually we're done. We're finished. We're out.
Dramas.
So what did you learn from having those difficult conversations and, you know, those tense moments? What did you both learn from it, from the process?
I think we really learned to push through, right? Like these were hard conversations. And you know, as Joe mentioned, it got really tense and uncomfortable, and it would have been really easy for us. And I think this happens to a lot of people to say, like, this is too much, and this person is never going to get it, and why am I bothering? And I don't need this in my life, and I have all these other things going on. You know, why am I doing this? And we had two clear reasons why. For us, one, we were contractually obligated to write a book together.
We were married at that point.
So there was that. But two, we felt mission oriented about this book, right? Like we felt like we wanted to do it no matter what. And we were trying to figure out how to get there. And so we had this built-in motivation, but we also just encourage people. And, you know, that, you know, is a lesson that we learned, was that sometimes we are too quick to cut people off and to say, I'm done, this is too much. And like pushing through and having some hard conversations and understanding that, understanding that this is a process, a journey. Keep it down over there.
I can't. My allergies are going crazy.
Here, Joe.
Look at that. That's going to turn into a meme. Look at that white lady sneezing while Christine talks about race.
But understanding that it's a process and a journey, and you know, it's ongoing. It's not one conversation and then everything is understood and people move on. It's, you know, it's kind of an up and down situation, and that you have to just lean into that and accept that. And so that's been really heartening when we get feedback or messages about that aspect of it, right? Like, I'm going to call somebody and try to reconnect, or I'm going to have this conversation that I've been scared to have. And I think people are inspired to do that, both by Joe and I sharing our personal experience, but hopefully also by our characters on the page who have to do the same thing. We wanted the reader to feel this feeling of just talk, just open up, just share, just be your authentic self, like go there, you know, as they're reading the book and cheering Riley and Jen on to do this, and then try to do it themselves.
And picking up on that authenticity, I mentioned right at the beginning that there are alternating chapters of Riley and Jen, but you actually didn't choose one character each. You wrote both characters. You both wrote both characters. So did one of you find it harder to write one character? How did you make sure there was still authenticity in the character whose life you are less, you know, knowledgeable about? How did you go about that?
Well, I think I mean, honestly, because Sue and I, we do write chapter by chapter, but we're constantly layering on top of each other. And so it's not like, oh, I wrote this chapter in this part of this woman's life. It's like, we really wrote both of the women. And there's so much of what they go through does have to do with race, and race informs so much about who Riley is and also who Jen is, but a lot of what informs the two of them is that they are both women living in the world, struggling to like make a friendship work. And those things are very universal. So I think that we could each speak to those in our own ways. And when it came to the race stuff, you know, we would each give it a try. We also talked a lot. So it's when, like, I would ask Christine questions when I was working on Riley. She would ask me questions when she was working on Jen. You know, interesting thing outside of race. I was either pregnant or with a newborn the entire time we were writing this book. So Jen's fertility journey and her being pregnant, like Christine would ask me a lot of questions about that, like when we were writing the labor scene, and I would ask Christine a lot of questions about her family and her background when we were writing about Riley. And then of course Riley's a journalist, and I've been a working journalist for the past 20 years. So it's hard to answer that question almost. And it's almost like I don't even remember it. I don't remember like us ever splitting the characters up. I just remember us like writing them over and over and over again. And I said this at a book club that I talked to last night, because someone was like, what's this? Like, they're like, the book does not sound like it was written by two people. What is the secret to that? I have to say, we have this superpower because of being two people and not one person. We read the book out loud to each other, over and over and over again. And I think that makes a book so much better, because you can see the parts that aren't working. You can see the dialogue that's not working. You can see the characters that aren't working. And if you're a solo writer, it's hard to do that because no one else cares about your book as much as you do. And so, Chris, they don't. Your husband's like, I care. He doesn't care as much. Your friends can only read it once, and they don't want to hear you like read it out loud to them. They just don't. But Christine and I are both.
Can you imagine just calling somebody and being like, "Can I read my novel out loud to you?" Thanks.
I mean, I would have to be like
12 to 15 hours.
Here's a lot of wine. May I read my novel out loud to you? But Christine and I have the benefit of we're both as invested. We both care as much. And so we can do those things. We can read them out loud to each other. We can reread passages and rip things up and try new things. And I think that's why the book feels so cohesive, like it would be written by one author.
I have to say, you did ask about a challenge that I have to say one of the challenges that I had is that, you know, as Joe's mentioned, I have been thinking about race all my life. I've been talking about race all my life, you know, family dinner table from when I could form sentences. And I had a harder time than I thought I was going to translating those experiences to the page, right? It's so much a part of your life. And when you have things that are such common experiences, as often happens with, you know, a lot of microaggressions, for example, wrangling them on the page almost feels cliche, right? Because, you know, you want to include them because so many, particularly other women of color, can see them and relate and say, oh my God, I know. But then when you do include them, it's like, oh, that again, right? Oh, someone's touching your hair. Oh, somebody, you know, but these things happen all the time. And so that was like a really difficult balance for me, you know, on terms of like what to include, what not to include, what was too much, you know, like just figuring out how to make it authentic, but not, you know, relying on what would feel even to some people more than others as cliche, right?
Absolutely. I will be touching on microaggressions later because it's such an important part, but let's get more into the book then. So it starts with a bang, quite literally. Apologize, I'm not an author, so my reading voice is probably not the best, but I just want to
it's beautiful. I love it. And you know, I'm just double fisting my tea and wine over here. We do, yeah. Love it.
When the bullets hit him, first his arm, then his stomach, it doesn't feel like he'd always imagined it would. Because of course, as a black boy grown in this neighborhood, he'd imagined it. He thought it would feel hot and sharp, like the slice of a knife. Instead, his entire body goes cold, like someone has filled his insides with ice. I mean, what a way to start the book. Obviously, it catches the reader's attention, you know, murder straight away, but also from the outset, gosh, brings up the issue of privilege, right? As a black boy growing in this neighborhood, he'd imagined it. Now, as a mixed race woman in the UK, thankfully, I've not had to really think about that. But I guess my question to you both is, before writing this book, did you think about it? And since writing this book, how has that changed your perspective?
About police shootings, you mean, or about?
No, about the issue of like having to think about your own death at the hands of a law enforcer.
Your own mortality at the hands of a law enforcer. Yeah, of course. I mean,
No,
you. Find me. Well, and I will say, I do think that it is a privilege as a white woman to not have to fear that, to not live. I mean, my parents never had to have the talk with me. I was raised to respect and think about police officers as people that would help you. You know, if you're in trouble, if you're lost in the mall, find the police officer and he'll help you find your mom, right? So I was not raised in a world to be fearful of police officers, or even to be fearful of my body in that respect, from like that kind of violence, that kind of very like from gun violence. You know, of course, as a woman, you're raised to be fearful about your body in like completely different ways, but not at the hands of a gun, and certainly not at the hands of a police officer.
Yeah, for my part, I think I mean, certainly police violence is the extreme, but this is, I remember, Joe and I having one of these conversations where I was trying to explain, I mean, part of being a person of color in America is constantly scanning the horizon for danger, right? Like that's a very extreme form of danger, like life and death danger. But on a daily basis, there's this, am I comfortable in this space? Am I safe in this space? There are places that I won't go, or I mean, this is just like a small story, but when I went to Florida last year for a few months, to Orlando, and I wanted to go to an outdoor class that was like COVID safe, that kind of thing. And so I found one online, know nothing about it, but it was like, a CrossFit gym that was having COVID classes, and just show up. And I think a lot of white people would have showed up and been like, oh, I'm going to this class. For me, I waited in the car because I needed to see who was going to show up. I didn't know what this group was going to be. It was, like who they were, like if it was safe. And so those are the kind of little things that you're always, having to balance. Like, will I be safe here? Will I be safe here? And that is a constant daily, flying somewhere, traveling, being alone at night. You think about, or in social situations, is someone going to say something? Am I going to overhear something? You're kind of always on the precipice of something going wrong. And so that is a level of vigilance that you always maintain as a person of color. And it's worse when you're in situations where, obviously it could be life or death.
And Joe, I guess, hearing what Christine just said there, it's knackering, it's tiring, have to, think about that all the time. How has your perspective changed now that you've become more aware of this is the lived reality for Black people?
Right, of course. Well, it's completely changed, right? Like I hadn't seen it before because I didn't know, because no one had told me. No one, like I had not talked about this with anyone before, but now that I have, and now that I've, talked with Christine about her lived experiences, and we've written these characters and written this book, it is like seeing the world in a whole new way, because it's kind of cliche, lame answer, but like, you have like fuzzy vision and you put on glasses for the first time, right? Like now I can see those microaggressions so much more clearly. I can see that fear, but it's not just that I can see it, but I can understand it and feel it now. And that's one of the reasons, and it's really one of our missions with the book, to be honest, and why it was so important to us that this book be not just fiction, but really readable and enjoyable fiction, because we want these characters to feel like people that are your friends or people that you really care about. And so for people that have not had a close friend of another race, like you can hear Riley's story and hear her family's story and hear her family's history that goes from a lynching to redlining to her parents still being forced out of their neighborhood in the present day. And that hits you in such a different, and I think more important, visceral way than all these clickbait headlines about race and critical race theory, and also all of the hot takes on the social media, with so much noise. Because if you can feel that empathy, then you do start, it's like you do put on your glasses, you can start to see the world in a different way. And we're hoping that the book helps readers who haven't had that experience for whatever reason. And we're not being critical of people that haven't had that experience. The truth is, people do tend to self-segregate. And so if you haven't, but then this book can give that to you, I think it will help you navigate the world in a different way. And not to be too woo-woo about it, but I genuinely believe that, and especially from the reaction that we've been hearing from readers so far.
And we've previously said this book is kind of all about having those difficult conversations. So in line with that, it would be remiss of me not to point out that this is being sponsored by a South African wine company, where obviously apartheid happened. And the reason I want to bring that up is because it's very much an albatross around the neck of South Africa. But I think that also that fact gets used by other countries as a bit of a shield. Other countries will say, oh, well, we're not as bad as them, so we're fine. And even in the case of America to the UK, actually, people will be like, oh, well, we're not shooting Black people, so we can't be racist. But actually, in your book, despite obviously the shooting kind of being the extreme catalyst of it all, you do touch on casual racism, the microaggressions, and actually even racism via inaction, right? So the white silences violence when Jen doesn't speak up to her mother's boyfriend for talking about Riley and her parents. So why was it important for you to flag up those littler things, you know, in the book? Why did that need to be spoken about?
Can I just say something about, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the South African connection before you answer that specific question, because I think one of the things that was so interesting to me, I spent 10 days with my white best friend in South Africa 4 years ago at this point. I like always take out 2020 as like a time frame. It's like the law when I do the math, which is so weird. But what was really interesting about being there was, you know, Julie and I have been talking about race since we were young, and so it's an ongoing conversation, and we were really leaning into those conversations in South Africa, and we talked to a lot of people. We talked to a lot of white South Africans, you know, cab drivers, winery owners. I mean, a lot of these people are in the tourist industry, or, you know, people that you're interacting with, and a lot of Black South Africans too. Everybody was very open to talking about race in a way that does not happen in America. And everybody was very honest, like almost to a person, about the brutal realities of race in South Africa. And I think that is such a fundamental difference in sort of acknowledging a problem and healing from a problem. And that if a South African tourist came here, I think it would be, they talk to cab drivers, they talk to restaurant owners, and they would say, oh, are you kidding? No, I mean, we had the civil rights movement and everything is fine now. And almost that's the most toxic issue with racism in America. It's really the gaslighting. It's really telling somebody that their experience is not valid, or that these systems, that are in place to perpetuate oppression are not real, or you're not, it's like this feeling of you're imagining it or you're overreacting is really actually more of the problem than anything else. And so to answer then your second question, I think that's why we really wanted to be so clear about all these little things in the book, right? Because it's like, name it, say it, show it, like you can't really tell me that this doesn't exist because this happened, and why we drew so much of what ends up on the page from real life experiences, both personal or firsthand accounts of people we interviewed, or, so on and so forth. And, nobody can tell us this isn't real. And I think that's like going on record, even though this is a novel, is really, really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with Christine that America has such a dysfunctional relationship with talking about race, and a terror of talking about race, and that is a really big part of the problem, and we're hoping that this book makes people a little bit more comfortable. It's funny when we think about our audiences. I mean, our audience is obviously mostly women too, and I think women are a different kind of emotional being, and I haven't done a book club event so I've been doing, we've been splitting them up, because essentially we do one event a day at this point since the book came out, and because it's really important for us to keep the conversation going and to talk to different groups. But I haven't been in one of the book clubs, like I've been doing a couple all white book clubs where someone didn't burst out crying. It's happened every night to me this week, because I do think that there's a lot of pent up desire to have these conversations, even and on white women's parts. And they haven't done it for whatever reason. Again, not being critical here, they haven't done it. They haven't. But now with the book, they feel like they can. And that's a really beautiful thing to get to see.
So just kind of focusing then on the idea of, seeing both sides and understanding and learning and finding that kind of middle ground, as it were, which is what I feel the book is about. I want to pair that theme with the first one.
Yay, love it.
Which is the Winemaker's Reserve Chardonnay. And the reason why I think this makes the perfect pairing for this theme is that it's a really excellent in-between point of, you get those big buttery Californian Chardonnays, and then you get the really crisp, clear kind of linear Chablis of the world. And this particular Chardonnay is really nice ripe and citrus and tangerine and honey with a little bit of mixed nut from the oak there.
Ooh.
And it's got some, but it's got good acidity too, and good minerality from the terroir, and then ends with a creamy finish. So I feel like it's got the old world and a bit of a new world, and it's made its standpoint in somewhere in the middle. And I feel like that really speaks to what the book is trying to get us to do, you know, with those alternating chapters and different points of view and seeing both sides of the story. So I think this is the perfect pairing for that theme. So
Love that.
Cheers to that.
Cheers
And
to
I,
that.
this is, I mean, I love the idea of a wine pairing with a theme in a book.
I
This
know.
is, you know,
We love
one of
wine.
my favorite things coming together.
Wine and books. Yeah.
Amazing.
Great.
Absolutely. So obviously, you know, the conversation around race and privilege is multifaceted. And there's one right in front of me here, the second one, as it were.
Oh.
It's called the Sir Lowry, right?
Oh.
So Sir
It sounds
Lowry.
so fancy.
Well, it does.
Who is this Sir Raleigh character?
Well, so
Yeah.
he was an Anglo-Irish British Army general, son of an Earl, and was the governor of the Cape Colony in the 1800s. So obviously a man of quite extreme privilege. Now, I'm not particularly up on my 19th century South African history, and I don't want to, you know, make a judgment on his character because I don't know. However, the point I really want to make is that our knowledge of history is really skewed because of the people who write it, right? And I now know the name of this man, this white man, because it's written on this bottle. And he's also, you know, got a few other things named in South Africa after him. And what really kind of struck me with the book is this idea of the unknown fallen. So Justin, for instance, really wanted to tell Kevin his name. You know, he did not want to die unknown. It's also echoed when Riley wants Jimmy's name remembered, like the others in the Legacy Museum with those jars of dirt filled from the soil locations where lynches took place. And, you know, that bit actually really made me tear up, because even though I'm not American, you know, it really hit me as a mixed race woman. Gosh, that some of my ancestors could have been treated like animals too. You know, why was it so important for you to write actually quite a harrowing scene? Like, I mean, the shooting obviously is harrowing, but for me, it caught me deeper. That idea of the lynching and the visualization of those jars was quite harrowing to me. Why was it important for you to include those in the book?
We really wanted to show, and this is what we've been talking about, interesting enough, in this whole conversation, that you know, it's another way to remind people that racism not only is real, but not ancient history. And so we really needed to bring in, or wanted to bring in, this really, you know, traumatic and not uncommon. I mean, this is one form of historical racial trauma, but there are a lot of other forms of historical racial trauma, economic, land getting stolen, et cetera, you know, that have reverberations through the generations. But we're not even talking about generations, meaning, you know, oh, it's so long, you know, my great grandmother that, you know, nobody remembers. This is, you know, a living, breathing, you know, really close loved one of Riley, our main character, who experienced this trauma and, you know, was not so far back in history. And all of those jars, you know, when she goes to Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Memorial, which is a real place in Alabama here, you know, it's a reminder of all the other Rileys out there, all the other grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sons and daughters, you know, who are still living very much with this trauma. So it's really easy, I think, for people to say, who don't know about this or not, you know, so first to say, well, that was so long ago, can't we get over this by now? Seems to be another thread, as we were talking about it, just like, make this go away, this isn't real. And we wanted this visceral, intense, vivid reminder, emotional reminder that it is very real and very consequential.
Yeah,
I know. It's interesting you say it was so long ago. Well, Emmett Till died in 55. 50, that's no time, really.
No time. It's a blink. Yeah.
And it was the same thing with my father, you know? I mean, my father could have easily been in Mexico, you know? I mean, these are people that are, I mean, my father's 82 now. These are people that would be still, you know, living, breathing people had they survived. And they would have grandkids and great grandkids and a legacy that they were robbed of, you know? And so I think that we need to remember that. And, you know, insofar as fiction or all books are durable, right? The reminder that we hope we're talking about this book a lot now, but we hope this story and this idea, you know, lives on, and we need records of these things. We need to acknowledge and remember and commemorate.
Absolutely. And you know, Jimmy's death obviously has a profound influence on Gigi, the grandmother, and she tells Sean to watch out for those white girls. And that kind of theme of influence of history and surroundings on who you are is the theme I want to pair the second wine with. So, you know, physical surroundings, both negative or, you know, or positive. Riley, I know, speaks of one job where she arrives and there's Confederate flags around. And then there's the feelings of feeling like she's home when she needs to go to church. So, you know, physical surroundings are obviously extremely important, and the emotional surroundings and who you surround yourself with, friends. And I know you touched upon the fact that actually such a small percentage, 10%, I think, of people have another friend that's of a different race. So I kind of just want to pair that with the Cab Sav, because now traditionally Cabernet has quite menthol characteristics anyway, but this one is particularly enhanced by its surroundings because it is planted next to a eucalyptus forest. So, you know, that has influence in that terroir and really brings this wine's personality and its USP. And it's got delicious, I wish you could smell this, ladies, nose of...
kind of torturous, actually.
I know.
It's delicious nose of really dark fruits and black currants and plum and a little bit of that spice, and a little bit of that earthiness, so I can really feel where it's come from. And it's also got, you know, influences of the cool coastal climate where it is in South Africa, and that gives it a bit of acidity and freshness and finesse. So that really spoke to me, you know, the influences on a person really spoke to me, because this wine, you can tell, has really been influenced by its position and its place in the world too.
Love that.
I love that. And I think it is such an important, when you say it like that, that is such an important theme of the book and our lives. But like, we are so influenced by we're forged by the world around us, race-wise, right? Or our families, or even our close friends. You know, we were trying to show that with Riley and Jen's relationship, and that they met when they were young. And that is such a meaningful and particular kind of friendship when you see somebody through all of the milestones of their life and all of their firsts, and you know, you see them becoming a person, and that is, you know, talk about your surroundings, like influences in a real way who you become.
And actually also influences that you can do, you know. So let's talk about that white silence is violence, and you know, she's seething, and under her breath she mutters something but doesn't actually do anything. So I think that's a really good point moving forward. You know, this whole book is about what can we do afterwards. Well, you can use your voice and call it out. That's really what I got from this. And I think actually quite interesting question maybe to you, Jo, then, in regard to this theme. How do you think this has made you a better ally? How can people be a better ally after reading this?
You know, I think that scene that you mentioned with Jen is so interesting. So I'll just set it up for people who haven't read the book yet. She's young, I think she's about 11, and her mother's white boyfriend, Jen is white, says the N-word about Riley's family as they're driving away. Riley's family doesn't hear it, but Jen hears it. And this has come up in a lot of book club discussions, particularly white book club discussions, where they say, what would you have done? And there's so many circumstances, right? She's a little girl. He's a man. There is this power differential. And so people say, I don't know. As a child, would I have spoken up? But then could I speak up now, and how would I speak up? And I think the difference, and especially through writing the book and talking about the book so much, is that talking about race is a muscle. And now I have developed it, right? It's like, I have more of a language, and I have more of an ability, I think, to have those conversations and speak up, because I know how to say them in a way, that also isn't attacking someone, to meet people where they are, but to say, hey. And a couple things have come up since we wrote this book together, where I've texted Christine, I'm like, wow, this thing happened at work, this person said this at work, I've got to say something. She's like, of course you have to say something. I don't know if I would have said something before, and not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to do it. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And we're hoping this book does helps them develop those muscles, because when you're talking about the book, you're talking about race. And so you think you're talking about fiction, you're just having like a good book club conversation, but you're actually really digging in about something that's hard for people to talk about. So if you can do it that first time, then you can keep doing it and keep having those conversations and keep probing a little further. So just writing this book, I think, has helped me to like really use my voice and speak up way more than I would have before, because I'm just more comfortable than I was. And we're hoping that readers get to that point too.
And I think that I just want to emphasize too, that is really a prerequisite for a close friendship with a person of color, right? And even, I think Joe and I's friendship is developed in such a way that when you care about somebody, then you want to do better, right? You know what I mean? Or you understand more. But we also want people to, benefit from this, even if you don't, that same level of empathy, even if you're not thinking of somebody specific in mind, in terms of like, this would upset Christine if she saw this, so I better say something. But to have that voice in your head, like a person of color cannot be close friends with somebody who they might be at a family dinner table, saying horrible things, and then come back and get a pedicure with you, like that level of dissonance cannot exist. And so that's a lot of what navigating these relationships are like you can't be one way in front of me and another way in the rest of the world. And so that's what Riley and Jen are also getting to. And that's what, we want people to understand, really, that allyship is a 24/7 kind of thing. It's not, oh, I'm a good friend when, we get together and then I go about my regular life otherwise. Like that doesn't work.
Yeah.
That really stuck out to me, I think, in the book, when the reporters turn up on the doorstep and Jen turns around and goes, oh, well, I've got a black friend. So that's like, even though you haven't discussed it, you're just going to use it as a shield. And yeah, that kind of really stuck out for me.
Exactly.
And also it was another thing, going down that microaggressions and casual racism kind of route, things that people say and they don't even realize why it's important that they shouldn't say this, or why it's important for them to think about it. So going on to that, my best friend's black. It was truly shocking to me to read in the back of your book that, as I mentioned, only 10% of people have a close friend as another race. Did you know that before? Before you found that statistic? I mean, gosh, honestly, I was shocked. Surely you must have been shocked too. Had you thought about it? I mean, what are your own friendship groups like? Do you, how do you even navigate that? It's difficult. Can't just go up to someone and be like, can I be your friend?
No, you can't. I did not know it. The statistic was actually quite shocking to me, but when you think about it, it makes sense. And once you think about it, then you can't unsee it too. So just look around and look at the people having dinner together. Look at the people jogging together. Look at the moms pushing strollers together. People do tend to self-segregate. And so, but I do think that, Christine, as a Black woman, because she was constantly forced to be in like circles where there were not as many Black women, like was forced to have a much more diverse friend group. And the question I get from a lot of white women so often is, well, what do I do? How do I do this? And again, you can't just go up to the one, Black parent at your school or in your neighborhood, because again, people tend to self-segregate into neighborhoods. And And I think you have to find a really authentic way to do this. You know, go to a book reading where it's a book that you wouldn't normally read that is about a racial topic, and go into spaces where you would not normally go.
And I think I'm just going to push back on something that Joe said. This is our dramatic fight. Here it is. No, but that this idea of self-segregation, I think white people tend to self-segregate. Black people are often not given the choice to, you know what I mean? Like I've been redlined or pushed into communities or schools, you know, I mean, white flight, for example, you know, it's a choice to leave and to stay in an enclave or to move to someplace or to enroll in a school, you know, so some of that is about the choice. I don't think there are equal levels of choices there necessarily, other, you know, in terms of social segregation. The result is still the same. We live in very siloed worlds, and you know, the goal of this book and some of the even the initiatives that we're doing in terms of encouraging conversations between Black book clubs and white clubs, Black readers and white readers, right? Like it's really important to have these conversations together rather than siloed, and they're different and more interesting and dynamic conversations, right? But that we want to help people do that because it's, as this social segregation we're talking about, you know, it's harder to do that organically, and so we're trying to be really active about doing that and giving people the forum to do it.
So we've obviously just discussed kind of influences there, and so kind of final word then, what influence do you want this book to have on other people?
We definitely want people to read it and talk about it, right? To use it as a springboard to open up about their own experiences with race, about their own insecurities, vulnerabilities, and you know, to have those authentic and yes, sometimes uncomfortable conversations, but that start a journey to having more and more of them, and with more and more different kinds of people, because that level of empathy and openness is the only way we start to untangle all of these, you know, really insidious and entrenched threads of race and racism in America or around the world.
Well, and to just, as Christine said, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and hopefully, you know, you can start out a conversation without, we see so many people cringe in the beginning of book club conversations when they know that we're going to talk about race, especially, I mean, really white women, being like, I don't know what, and you know, hopefully like take away some of that fear and some of that anxiety and make talking about race just a little bit more commonplace, the bad, but also the good and the ugly and everything, just to, you know, help people develop that muscle.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, ladies. That was Christine Pride and Joe Piazza, co-authors of We Are Not Like Them. Thank you to our sponsors, Journey's End, for the Sir Lowry Cab Sauv, and to the winemakers Chardonnay Reserve. I've been Aleesha Hansel, and you've been watching Pairing Pages. See you next time.